We have an exciting episode today. We're talking with my friend, our very own Dr. Rose James, and we're going to be unpacking everything food allergy related. So if you have a little one and you're not sure, does my child have a food allergy? And you're not sure what symptoms to look out for, this episode is for you. So tell a friend to tell a friend and share this message because we have some important things to cover today. Dr. James, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing with food allergies and your experience.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rose James, and I'm a pediatrician and a mom of 2 children with food allergies. So that's pretty much it.
All right. And so food allergies, we know it's a really hot topic, very important conversation. What are some of the top foods? And now we're going to focus on infancy, right? Because this is when we're just beginning to introduce solids. And I know, from your experience, you had an infant who experienced the food allergy. So let's first cover the top list of those foods on the allergy list.
So the top 8 food allergens are milk, egg, soy, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, shellfish, and fish. That makes the list of the majority of food allergies that we see children with.
So when we're thinking about feeding our kiddos and we have foods that have these ingredients, should we not give it to our child at all because these are like the dirty 8? Or how should we be telling parents and how should we be approaching the list? Should we?
We don't recommend avoiding food. You would treat any infant that you are starting your feeding journey with, and you are introducing solids to introduce them like you would any other child. But those food that are very allergenic, usually I just say to take some extra precautions as you, for example, introducing your nuts or eggs and things like that, just to take some special precautions and just to be aware when you're doing them.
And that's exactly what you did in your case. So let's talk a little bit about your personal journey with food allergens, with your own little ones. Let's go back to like when you're first mom. Super, super interesting time. I remember when I was a first time mom, I had no idea what I was doing. To be honest, food allergens at that time, and that was over like 9 years ago, it never even occurred to me. I'm here as a speech therapist, went to school for it. I know the literature, but as a first time mom, I guess just with everything going on, I wasn't thinking about food allergens. So tell us a little bit about your firsthand experience with food allergens as you were introducing solids to your baby.
So my first experience with food allergies happened when I was introducing solid to my 6-month-old. And our first cue or thought that my kid had food allergies was when I introduced him to peanut products. And just a little bit of peanut in his mouth, just to see how he would do with it.
And just to clarify, I know we're talking about peanuts, but we're talking about peanut butter and not the actual nut. Sorry, just wanted to...
peanut product. Never introduce the nut to a baby because it's a choking hazard. Right. And in our case, we simply put a little bit of peanut butter on the tip of my finger, clean fingers, and just rub it in the baby's mouth and kind of just see how he does with it, if he would tolerate it. And in our case, the very first introduction, my son had a rash with peanut butter. It is not very common for children to have a huge reaction or even reaction with the first time introduction of a food or allergenic food, because usually your body has to prime it itself to that food product. But in our case, the very first time he had actual peanut butter, he had a rash around his mouth, and then he had some spitting up, where we were thinking, could this be, an anaphylactic reaction or could it just be just a regular allergy? And at that time, I treated it um, just as a regular allergy because the primary symptoms at that point was him having a rash and hives. And you may be wondering, how do you determine, is this just an allergic reaction that you can just give some Benadryl at home or see your pediatrician in the morning versus something more serious that you have to go to the ER? And the rule of thumb for anaphylaxis is two system involvement. And the system can be rash, it could have some GI symptoms such as vomiting, or you can have some respiratory symptoms or respiratory distress or trouble breathing. And there are other lists of symptoms if you were to Google anaphylaxis. But the rule is if you have two systems that is involved, then that child needs an epi. And that first reaction for us, it was primarily skin biting. So then we waited and we had our pediatrician visit in the morning that was already scheduled. And we went to that visit. And when I went to that visit, we were talking about his feeding, which is very important at every visit to address how is your child eating, how you're moving and progressing through the feeding journey with your child. I mentioned to our pediatrician, hey, I gave him some peanut last night, and he got this rash, and here are the pictures. And also, pictures are very helpful. If you think your kid's going to have a rash, or you think you see a rash with a food product, take a picture of it because it helps to help us see what happened in the moment, because that rash might be there for just a couple minutes and then it doesn't come. It's not there by the next morning. So snap a picture, helps a pediatrician like me. Um, so yeah, so as I was mentioning about the rash around his mouth, well, she says, and I'm like, I think he's allergic to peanuts. And then it was time for us to start this whole pathway of going to the allergist to determine what else that he is allergic to, and then how to continue to introduce solids.
Right.
And you know,
something about the EpiPen.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or an EpiPen is what you would use to treat an anaphylactic reaction if more than two systems were involved. So if you ever think your child is having an anaphylactic reaction, call 911. Because even if you don't have one in your home, because if you don't know you have an allergy, it's your first time having a reaction, then you should call 911 and tell them you think your child is having an allergy or a reaction to a food, so that way they come prepared.
So if you don't have an EpiPen at home,
yeah,
call 911.
Call 911. And even if you have an EpiPen at home, the rule is still to call 911. But yeah, so not everyone's going to have an EpiPen, and there are children who are going to have allergic reaction or even anaphylactic reaction who didn't know yet, because like I said earlier, most children don't have a reaction the first time a food is introduced, just because their body hasn't been primed to fight that food as something bad when it isn't. So yeah, so we went to the allergy clinic, and there my son was diagnosed with peanut allergy, tree nuts. At the time, it was pistachios and cashews were the two main ones that he was allergic to. And then eggs was added to the list. And so we went home after that, and we proceed to continue to our feeding, just introducing solid like any other mom would, but we were just a lot more careful and a lot more vigilant at that point, because we knew there's a chance that he would be allergic to more things.
Did you stop feeding him peanuts at that point? Like completely stop? Because sometimes we hear that, they're infants, they might just have a reaction now, but they'll outgrow it. Did your son, did his case of allergens improve, or tell us a little bit about what happened after you've kind of first realized or got that diagnosis with that?
So if you see an allergist and an allergist tell you that your child is allergic to a food, the rule is to avoid that food. You don't introduce it in any capacity or in any amount at this point. The rule of thumb for food that you're very allergic to, especially food that you can have an anaphylactic reaction to, is to avoid. And the other good thing to know is that just because your reaction to one food at one point was just skin fighting, the next time the reaction might be stronger, or it might be a bigger reaction where you actually do have anaphylaxis. And then the last thing is, once you're allergic to a food, you don't know how much of it is going to trigger a reaction, whether it's a teeny tiny bit, whether it's just a tiny bit of the peanut protein that is going to trigger the reaction, you don't know. So the best rule is avoid, avoid, and avoid until your the allergists tell you it is either safe to introduce or for them to challenge your child themselves. So just keep that in mind. If you have, so when other people are like, oh, they're gonna outgrow it, oh, a little bit won't hurt. It's like, no, what's a little bit?
Right?
What is your child going to react to? And you don't know that. And so it's important to let the professionals, the allergists, guide you at that point of when to introduce, how much to introduce, and if you need to do it in the office themselves.
So kind of going back to when
Uh-huh.
introducing these new foods, and we have that
Yeah.
top 8 list.
Yeah.
To kind of give you a refresher: eggs, milks, peanuts, tree nuts, soy,
Uh-huh.
wheat, fish, and shellfish. We usually say that we like introducing one food at a time, and we like to wait
Uh-huh.
at least 3 days to kind of see
Mm-hmm.
how the system responds, like how the infant responds to that new food. In your case, did you wait um, after, say, that big incident where, we're going to go into that next, but we talked a little bit about the body may not react immediately to the food
Mm-hmm.
because I guess it hasn't been primed yet and it hasn't quite
Mm-hmm.
built up that resistance or that fight response to this new food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So kind of guide us a little bit in terms of how much to wait and what to look out for and when to know when to stop, cease, desist, like never give this to the child, or when to keep timing.
Yeah. So if you see a reaction to a food that you're feeding your child, is to, if you see a reaction, just stop, put the food away. And then the other thing is also to wash your kid and like wash the protein that has maybe on the, like if your kid has a spit up, then now the peanut protein would be in the spit up and now it's on their skin. So I always tell family, if you see your child is having a reaction, stop the feeding. Don't introduce that food again until you see a pediatrician or the allergist.
Mhm.
And then after you stop the feeding, go ahead and rinse off this child, put them in a tub of water and kind of just wash as much of the allergenic protein, because if it's in your skin, you may still be reacting to it.
Got it. So as your
Um,
child has gotten older,
mhm.
what happened?
Well, so my kid, at that point, that first reaction with my child, he was 6 months old.
Mhm.
And then around 7 months, 7.5 or so, we would just continue to feed him. He was eating fine. And then we started to introduce dairy containing products. That's when we have our next big allergic reaction. So the first time he had milk, he did fine. It was nothing, didn't think anything. I'm like, oh, we're probably going to be fine. The second time he had milk, I'm like, I think he's going to be fine. But,
And just to be clear, these are milk-based products. We're not giving
yeah,
like
I'm
straight
giving,
whole milk. Mhm.
yes. So dairy. So
Dairy.
the first time we give dairy containing products, such as like a yogurt or like these little yogurt bites that
Mhm.
they sell in the baby aisle in the grocery store.
Mhm.
Um, and he did fine. He did okay. So we were like, okay, maybe we're fine. And then until one day we give him a bite of yogurt that I was eating. And then he had a massive reaction at that point. And that reaction was really big. It was within minutes. It was probably 2 or 3 bites of yogurt. So it wasn't even a lot.
Mhm.
And then we noticed that he was just very quiet, and then his lips were swollen. He had hives everywhere.
Wow.
And then within a minute, as I went to take him out of his high chair, just to kind of clean him up and see. And then he started vomiting everywhere. And at that point, we realized, oh, here's our second symptoms. And we give him an EpiPen. We use our EpiPen and we give him a shot. And we gave him the first shot. Um, and he seemed okay for a sec, but then he the symptoms still continue to progress. That's the thing with an allergic reaction. The first important thing is the very first time, the moment you realize that your child is having an anaphylactic reaction, that there's two symptoms involved. You don't wait, you don't call. If your EpiPen is nearby, grab it and give that EpiPen before you call 911, because you want that Epi in their thigh as quickly as you can, because the Epi is what saves their lives. So don't wait, don't call. It's not time to panic. I mean, I know it's hard not to panic because it's your baby, and there's that emotional aspect you don't want, but you don't want your baby to be hurt. But the first thought is just grab your Epi. So grab your Epi, and then within 5 minutes or so after he got his first Epi, he was still having symptoms at that point. He was starting to have more respiratory distress. He was wheezy. His lips were bluish, where I'm just like, well, we're having even more symptoms. So at about the 4 to 5 minute mark, we gave a second Epi shot, which brings me to our next point is your Epi prescriptions, or a pack of Epi prescriptions, always come in two. So you always keep it together. So two doesn't mean you get one to grandma, one at your house, or one to daycare, one at your house. Nope. If grandma needs Epi, she needs two, a pack of two. And then, so we always keep our Epi together, don't separate them. That's why it comes, because sometimes before 911 arrives, the child may need a second Epi, and that's what that one is there. So that way you can give them a second Epi if they're still having symptoms. So yeah, that's what we did. We gave him a second Epi, and after the second Epi, his respiration improved, so he wasn't having any more distress. His breathing was better, his color improved, his lips were not as swollen, and 911 arrived. But by the time 911 arrived, like, we live 3 minutes away from the fire department, so it's like 3 streets over from us. It still took a good 10-15 minutes for them to come to us, and by the time they arrived, I had already given 2 Epis. So even though the response was quick, but his reaction was so severe and so bad that I'm thankful that we had an EpiPen or 2 EpiPens in our home.
That is amazing. Yeah. Life-saving, literally.
Yeah, Epi save lives. Every year you hear about death associated with food allergies, and with people who don't have their Epi, or Epi was not given soon enough. So the rules of them is always have your Epi everywhere you go. Always keep your Epi on you. Always have 2 Epis, one just in case, one as a backup. And then use it quickly if you're having a reaction.
So food allergies are real. You've heard it here, parents, caregivers, grandparents. It's on the rise. Like 1 in 13 children, that's a statistic that the CDC has put out, is affected by food allergies. Talk to a pediatrician. Because where do we get the EpiPens, Doc?
So EpiPen, you get it from your pediatrician or the allergist, and it's a prescription that goes to the pharmacy. You pick it up like any medicine. And the EpiPens, most of them are covered by your insurance, but sometimes, you just deal with the insurance part. So if you're getting the runaround from your insurance or from the pharmacy, call your pediatrician's office to find out how we can help with getting an Epi. And then once you've had a food allergy, remember to always carry your Epi. Like, literally, I can't stress how important it is. If you're going to a new restaurant, if you're going to grandma's house, if you're going to school, you should always have an Epi. Like for us, we have an EpiPen or 2 EpiPens in every bags in our home. So in our kids' backpack, one stays at school, one is in our diaper bag for our younger child, one's in my purse. We always have an Epi, sometimes more than one, because if I grab a bag in the morning and I'm not sure, there's always Epis in there, because we know it can save his life, if he were to accidentally consume something that he's highly allergic to.
Got it. So your oldest child is what? 5 or 6 now?
He's 6. He's 6.
And as we kind of wrap up on this final note, have you noticed any improvements as far as the allergens that he's kind of reacting to, or has it increased, decreased as he's gotten older?
So our allergy list is still pretty long. Eggs and milk and peanuts and tree nuts, and now we have sesame on our list. So the allergy list is still long, but with our allergists, we are able to reintroduce, for example, different, and that's a topic all on its own, is how to
How to
reintroduce
challenge the
things.
system, when to challenge the
Um,
system, right?
yeah, and
When
we
it's
have been
appropriate.
following with our allergist for 5 years. So
Wow.
we follow his blood levels. We skin test him every year.
Wow.
And so we started the process of reintroducing like dairy in a baked form. So
Mhm.
currently, like my son can have like a muffin or a biscuit that has milk in it, but it has to be baked in the oven at 350 degrees for a certain amount of time before he's able to consume it. Um, so, but that's under the advice of our allergist. And before we are able to do that at home, we challenge him in the office for a couple of hours where a nurse
Mhm.
stays in there with him and introduce it. So again, if you have an allergy, you don't just start the introduction process, even though, yeah, I might be comfortable managing and well, an anaphylactic reaction at home. I never want to manage another anaphylactic reaction at home again,
Great.
ever again. It's emotional, and I think that's the other thing people don't talk about is the emotional
Oh, yeah.
toll.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, that's another topic. Because the fear
Don't worry,
and
you'll be back. You'll be back. We'll have you for
the
here for more.
fear and anxiety that goes into feeding your
Yeah.
child,
Yeah.
and then how to look for ingredients, because all these allergens we talk about, they're hidden in so many different things.
Right.
About reading ingredient list. So there's all that goes into it. So just because once you find out you have an allergy, it doesn't stop there. There's so much other thing that goes. It's your home. How do you feed your rest of your family? What does feeding looks like? Eating out, traveling. It doesn't just, it affects all of those areas of your lives, and not to mention the emotional toll,
Yeah.
on you and your child.
Just a great conversation.
Uh-huh.
Stay plugged in, Dr. Rose. We can't thank you enough, Rosie. We can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to be here to
Uh-huh.
share on this, on this platform. With parents, new moms, new dads, caregivers, concerned relatives. Food allergies are real, but we have
They are.
information, we have the professionals, we have or care team, we have or physicians or docs who are trained and equipped. We have medications, prescriptions that are available to kind of help us navigate this journey. So if you know someone who's affected by food allergies, Dr. Rose said it best, it affects the entire family, how we feed, and all of that. Very important topic, so stay tuned. Come back, plug in, give our video a like. We'll be talking about topics to help you along your feeding journey. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.